The mystery of Jack the Ripper. At the end of the 19th century, a foreign traveler only had to spend a day sightseeing in London to feel stirred by England's power. At Westminster, the Houses of Parliament proudly proclaimed British global domination, while at Buckingham Palace, Queen Victoria crowned the nation's golden age. All along the Thames to the sea, lined with ship after ship of merchants and the Royal Navy, visitors could see for themselves the formidable maritime might of the largest empire the world had ever known. But all was not well with London. Joseph Conrad's 1899 novel, Heart of Darkness, describes London as one of the dark places of the earth. To the theater-goers and shoppers thronging the well-lit, opulent streets of the West End, this description might have seemed out of place. But just 3 miles to the east, in the neighborhood of Whitechapel, disease, alcoholism, and poverty ravaged the lives of thousands of souls. It was a place that was, as the Diocese of London reported, as unexplored as Timbuktu. Before we dive deep into this tale of horror, please subscribe to our channel for exciting content. The mystery of Jack the Ripper began on August 31st, 1888, when the body of a dead woman was found in a Whitechapel street. Her throat had been cut and her abdomen gouged open. 3 months later, when what became known as the Autumn of Terror had ended, 4 more women had undergone the same grisly fate. The killings electrified England. Wealthy Londoners were suddenly forced to take notice of a dangerous world located at home in their midst. As the hunt for the unidentified killer dragged on, well-to-do Victorian society, from Queen Victoria down, grew obsessed by the case. In the city, Jack the Ripper became a stand-in for the prejudices and fears of London society. Anti-Semites used the murderer to defame the Jews of the East End. The poor blamed the rich, and the rich blamed the poor. Above all, the Ripper case laid bare an uncomfortable irony. At the heart of a city that prided itself on spreading Pax Britannica around the world, a murderer walked free, and none of the authorities could stop him. When the murders abruptly ceased in November 1888, the mystery only deepened and grew. Nearly 140 years later, Jack the Ripper has become arguably the most infamous serial killer. The murders. In the late 19th century, life for lower-class women in London was difficult. Many of them worked for meager wages as domestic servants or in sweatshops. Their daily wages often meant they would have a place to sleep at night. 3 or 4 pence would buy a bed in one of Whitechapel's many lodging houses. In desperation, women could turn to prostitution, and certain streets of London's East End became notorious destinations for the sex trade, of which the Ripper's victims had all been working at the time of their deaths. When Jack the Ripper was terrorizing Whitechapel, other killers were at work as well. Collectively known as the Whitechapel murders, the violent deaths of 11 women revealed the dangers facing lower-class women at the time. Of these murders, most experts agree that Jack the Ripper was responsible for the 5 that occurred from August through November 1888. Discovered in the early morning hours of August the 31st, Mary Ann Nichols, also known as Polly, was a 43-year-old mother of 5 and the first confirmed victim of Jack the Ripper. The daughter of a blacksmith, she spent much of her youth in various poorhouses of the capital. Abandoned by her husband, she earned a living through workhouses, prostitution, and petty theft. 1 week later, Annie Chapman, a 47-year-old widow and mother, was discovered on September 8th, shortly before 6 a.m. in a yard on Hanbury Street. Her injuries appeared similar, but she was missing some of her internal organs. At the end of the month, the killer would claim 2 more lives in one night: Elizabeth Stride, age 45, and Catherine Eddowes, age 46. The last official victim met her death on November 9th, 1888. The body of 25-year-old Mary Jane Kelly was discovered brutally mutilated in a lodging house in Miller's Court. All residents of Whitechapel, these women lived in poverty, which left them vulnerable to the predator prowling the streets. The investigation. From the beginning of the investigation, Scotland Yard was flummoxed. According to Edmund Reed, one of the detectives assigned to investigate the case, wrote, "The 5 women were all active or former prostitutes. All of the victims were from the lower class. All lived no more than a quarter of a mile from one another, and all the murders were committed after pub closing time. But surprisingly, no one ever heard a single scream or cry for help, unusual for such a densely populated neighborhood. None of the bodies exhibited defense wounds, such as slashes or bruising on the hands and forearms. The one solid reported sighting of the killer was on the early morning of September 8, 1888, when a woman saw Annie Chapman, accompanied by a foreigner of medium height, wrapped in a dark cloak. They are believed to have met just after 5:30 a.m., and her body was found half an hour later. Like all of his other victims, there were no signs of resistance, and no one heard her cry out. The other aspect that all the cases had in common was, of course, the killer's use of a knife and his customary pattern of not only killing the women, but defiling their dead bodies. At least 3 of his victims were found with internal organs removed. A wave of panic spread across the whole East End of London. Public fascination spiked after September 27, 1888, when both the Central News Agency and the police received a letter claiming to be from the killer. He taunted them for pursuing false leads and vowed in a broad London English, "I am down on whores and I shan't quit ripping them till I do get buckled." 3 days later, the mutilated bodies of Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes were found. Many believe this letter is a hoax, but its signature, Jack the Ripper, gave the unknown killer his moniker. Following the discovery of the body of Mary Jane Kelly in November, physician Thomas Bond was invited to perform an autopsy on her remains. His report makes for stomach-churning reading, even today. The murderer slashed the victim's throat from one side to the other and then cut open the abdominal cavity. A theory mulled by the police was that the Ripper was a physician or even a surgeon. But Bond, who knew a thing or two about incisions, dismissed this. True to his nickname, the murderer was no precise cutter and lacked even the technical knowledge of a butcher or horse slaughterer. He is quite likely to be a quiet, inoffensive-looking man, probably middle-aged and neatly and respectably dressed. The suspects. Whitechapel's closeness to the London docks led the police to think the killer might have been a sailor passing through, or perhaps a stevedore. At the time of the murders, the police investigation centered on local characters. Among these were Aaron Kosminski and John Jack Pizer, both working-class men. Francis Tumblety was an American-born quack doctor who possessed a collection of human organs and, it was reported, detested prostitutes. Montague John Druitt, who was from a wealthy background but had fallen on hard times, was regarded as sexually deviant. Sauer Klosowski was a known poisoner, but not so far as anyone knew, a stabber and mutilator. The fact that Whitechapel was home to many Jews, and that 2 of the early suspects, Pizer and Kosminski, were Jews, fueled anti-Semitic feelings at the time. Pizer was suspected of being an unidentified and malevolent prowler, nicknamed Leather Apron by the press. The media characterized this figure as Jewish, with one article noting that local women are united in the belief that he is a Jew or of Jewish parentage. Following the murder of Catherine Eddowes on September 30th, police found a message scrawled in chalk above where her blood-stained apron was found. The Jews and Sikh are the men that will not be blamed for nothing. The cases against the early suspects fell apart, either because of a lack of evidence or because suspects had solid alibis. The police force came under increasing attack in the press, eventually leading to the resignation of the Scotland Yard chief, Sir Charles Warren. The new lead investigator, Melville McNagton, was popular with the public, but even he did not solve the crime. The press picked over the police's perceived failures. They were slow to react to the murders. They took too few photographs. They destroyed evidence. In October 1888, the Cork Examiner reported, "People are asking whether Warren is a criminal or an imbecile. Theories and notions. Jack the Ripper has been the subject of more than 100 nonfiction books, dozens of novels, several television series, and more than 20 films. The mystery has even given birth to an entire discipline known as Ripperology, which specializes in exhaustive research about the case and theories behind the murders. The variety of suspects is staggering. William Gladstone, British Prime Minister, a relative of Winston Churchill, and the English painter Walter Sickert, even though no credible evidence has ever been produced to substantiate these claims. Some have suggested wealthy doctors as suspects, including Sir William W. Gull, Queen Victoria's personal physician. More recent suspects include American serial killer H.H. Holmes, notorious for several gruesome murders during the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. It is also claimed he was Jack the Ripper. The only thing these diverse hypotheses have in common is this: none have been convincing enough to achieve the consensus necessary to close the case for good. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, then give it a thumbs up. Share your thoughts in the comments section below. Until next time, stay curious.